September 12, 1944. A muddy field near Bayeux, Normandy. Unterfeldwebel Fritz Müller stared at the British lieutenant standing before him, certain he had misunderstood. After 3 days as prisoners, he and his 4 kitchen comrades expected the worst: transfer to a distant camp, separation from their unit, perhaps hard labor in the mines they'd heard whispered about in frightened voices. Instead, this British officer was pointing at their Gulaschkanone, the wheeled field kitchen German soldiers affectionately called the Gulaschkanone, and asking through an interpreter if they could prepare dinner. Not just for themselves, for everyone. British soldiers, German prisoners, even the displaced French civilians huddled in the nearby barn. Before we continue this remarkable story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, whether you're joining us from London, Berlin, New York, or anywhere else in the world. Your support helps us bring these forgotten stories of humanity amid war back to life. Müller glanced at his men. Wilhelm Becker, the Hamburg hotel chef. Ludwig Hahn, barely 22. Karl Schmidt and Otto Weber, both bakers in peacetime. They stood in their stained field gray uniforms, exhausted, defeated, waiting for whatever punishment their captors deemed appropriate. The concept violated everything Nazi propaganda had prepared them for regarding British barbarism toward prisoners. For 4 years, they'd heard stories of Allied cruelty, starvation rations, systematic abuse of German POWs. The radio broadcasts had been relentless, the pamphlets distributed to every unit explicit. Surrender meant suffering. Yet here stood this lieutenant, matter-of-factly explaining that his unit had outpaced their own supply column. They were all hungry. The Germans clearly knew how to operate their equipment. Would they cook? And in that moment, Müller realized something that made his hands tremble more than any artillery barrage. Everything they'd been told about their enemies might have been a lie. The British 50th Northumbrian Infantry Division had been pushing eastward since the successful Normandy landings 3 months earlier. Their advance had been rapid, sometimes covering 15 miles in a single day through the hedgerow country that had turned into a graveyard for both armies. Among their haul of prisoners, the usual mixture of exhausted infantrymen, shell-shocked artillerymen, and the occasional defiant officer, they'd captured something unexpected: a complete Heeresverpflegungsamt detachment, an army provisioning office unit with 5 trained cooks, 3 fully operational field kitchens, and supplies meant to feed a German company for a week. The 50th Division's war diary, preserved now in the National Archives at Kew, contains a brief notation for September 12, 1944. Captured German field kitchen with personnel intact. Equipment serviceable. Decision made to utilize same for immediate improvement of food situation. 23 words that would change the lives of everyone involved. This wasn't outlined in any military handbook. The Geneva Convention addressed treatment of prisoners but said nothing about employing enemy cooks to feed their captors. Yet British pragmatism, that distinctly understated approach to solving problems, saw an opportunity where doctrine saw only complications. They had hungry men. The Germans had working kitchens and the skills to operate them. Mathematics, not ideology, dictated the decision. The German Feldkoch herd represented remarkable efficiency in mobile catering. Designed to feed 125 to 150 men from a single unit, these wheeled kitchens could prepare meals while literally on the move, towed behind trucks or horse-drawn wagons. 2 large kettles, each holding 65 liters, could produce soup, stew, or coffee for an entire company. German military specifications required these kitchens to begin serving hot food within 30 minutes of setup. It was efficiency the British Army Catering Corps, for all their dedication, could seldom match. Müller had served as a baker in Frankfurt before the war. His shop on Bergerstrasse had produced 300 loaves daily, dense dark bread that sustained working families through the economic chaos of the 1930s. When conscription came in 1942, the Wehrmacht recognized his skills and assigned him to field kitchens rather than frontline infantry. He'd kept his unit fed through the brutal Eastern Front winter of 1943, the chaotic retreat through Poland, the desperate redeployment to France ahead of the Allied invasion. Now, as a prisoner, He faced the bizarre prospect of continuing his profession for the men who'd defeated him. The German cooks exchanged glances. Refusing might mean separation, transfer to the standard POW camps, perhaps shipment to Britain or even America. Accepting meant maintaining their unit cohesion, continuing their work, and perhaps, just perhaps, better treatment. According to Müller's own account, recorded in a 1957 interview with British military historian Richard Atkins, it took less than a minute to decide. Jawohl, Müller replied, straightening his posture despite 3 days without proper rest. We can cook. What supplies do you have? That simple exchange began one of the war's most unusual arrangements. Within hours, the Gulaschkanone was steaming. German cooks were chopping ingredients with the practiced efficiency of men who'd performed these tasks 10,000 times. British soldiers were forming queues with their mess kits, creating a scene that contradicted everything both sides had been told about their enemies. The first meal revealed profound differences neither side had anticipated. Müller's team prepared their standard Eintopf, a thick one-pot stew combining potatoes, turnips, barley, and small portions of preserved meat. The British soldiers approached the steaming kettles with visible skepticism. Their own army catering typically served components separately, meat, vegetables, and potatoes distinctly plated, not mixed together in what seemed like Germanic chaos. It's all together, one British corporal observed, poking his spoon into the thick mixture with the caution of a man diffusing ordnance. The German cooks nodded, explaining through halting English and elaborate gestures that this method maximized nutrition while minimizing fuel usage. Every resource had to count. The British soldiers' confusion deepened when no bread accompanied the meal. German military cooking relied on the dense, dark Kommissbrot, 750-gram loaves that soldiers carried in their packs, not prepared fresh at each meal. British Army records from 1944 documented standard rations at 3,300 calories daily per soldier. The Germans, by regulation, should have received 3,100 calories, but by September 1944, actual provisions had declined to approximately 2,600 calories. This caloric reality was visible in the contrast between the well-fed British troops and their somewhat leaner German prisoners. Most striking to the German cooks was the British obsession with tea. Within hours of establishing the field kitchen, British quartermasters delivered 12 large tins of tea leaves alongside white sugar and powdered milk. Ludwig Hahn, the youngest cook whose post-war memoir Köchenfurt and Fine documented this arrangement, wrote that the British officers insisted tea be available continuously, not just at mealtimes. They drink it like water, he observed, and become irritable without it like addicts denied their medicine. British Army regulations from 1944 confirm a tea ration of 5/8 ounce per man daily, enough for 6 strong cups. Tea wasn't merely a beverage in the British Army. It was a ritual, a comfort, a psychological anchor in the chaos of war. The Germans had coffee, but nothing approached this cultural dependence on a single drink. The British soldiers, meanwhile, marveled at how the German cooks utilized every available resource. Vegetable trimmings became soup base, stale bread transformed into thickening agents. Bones were roasted before boiling to extract deeper flavor. These techniques reflected years of German resource constraints that had trained military cooks in extreme efficiency. British catering corps training, by contrast, emphasized standardization over improvisation, consistency over creativity. Cultural misunderstandings abounded in those first weeks. German cooks prepared coffee at dawn, following continental traditions. British soldiers demanded tea. The Germans scheduled the main meal at midday, when men needed energy for afternoon duties. The British expected substantial evening meals. British officers initially insisted on being served separately from enlisted men, a class distinction that bewildered the Germans, whose officers ate the same food as their troops, merely in different locations. By the second week, practical compromises emerged. Meal schedules posted in both languages on a salvaged barn door showed how timing evolved through negotiation. Breakfast now included both coffee and tea. Lunch became lighter than German tradition, but heartier than British custom. Dinner incorporated elements from both cuisines, a hybrid born of necessity. British supply sergeants provided ingredients the German cooks had never encountered. Canned tomatoes from Italy, dried fruits from Palestine, exotic spices from colonial outposts across the empire. The Germans experimented cautiously, aware that failure might end this unusual arrangement. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Miller confided to a German-speaking British lieutenant, "We thought you would be monsters. We were told you starved prisoners, worked them to death in mines." The lieutenant, a schoolteacher from Yorkshire named James Harrington, replied with equal candor, "We thought all Germans were fanatics, true believers in Hitler's madness. Yet here you are, just cooks trying to do honest work." That conversation, recorded in Harrington's diary preserved at the Imperial War Museum, captured the gradual dissolution of propaganda-induced prejudice. Shared meals were accomplishing what political speeches never could, revealing common humanity beneath enemy uniforms. Military historian Arnold Kershaw's analysis of British 21st Army Group records confirms that by October 1944, at least 17 similar arrangements had developed across the Allied front. German cooks maintaining their duties under British supervision. The practice spread through informal communication between units, passed along by officers who recognized efficiency when they encountered it. The British 50th Division's medical officer noted improved morale in units with German cooking support, attributing it to more regular hot meals and increased variety in preparation methods. Soldiers fight better when properly fed. This truth transcends nationality. What began as expedient improvisation was evolving into structured policy. Professional respect between cooks transcended national uniforms. When British supply trucks delivered unfamiliar ingredients, American spam, powdered eggs, dehydrated onions, German and British kitchen staff huddled together, comparing techniques and trading knowledge that neither side's military had anticipated sharing. October 1944 brought new challenges as the British advance pushed into the Netherlands. The 50th Division brought their German cooking unit with them, an arrangement no military manual had anticipated or addressed. In a requisitioned Dutch schoolhouse near Eindhoven, Miller and his team constructed 3 improvised ovens from brick rubble, sheet metal, and parts salvaged from damaged field kitchens. The British officers had asked if they could make proper bread, so they built ovens. The structures produced 200 loaves daily, combining German baking techniques with British white flour. The dense, nutritious loaves became highly prized among British troops accustomed to pre-sliced tins of mass-produced bread shipped from England. The aroma of fresh baking, a scent that evoked home, normalcy, peace, wafted across the encampment each morning, a small victory against the dehumanizing machinery of war. British supply records from October 1944 show a 40% reduction in shipped bread to units employing German bakers. This saved valuable cargo space for ammunition and medical supplies. Pragmatism compounded pragmatism. When British quartermasters provided truly exotic ingredients, canned pineapple from Hawaii, dried coconut, American spam, the German cooks approached them with scientific curiosity. Ludwig Hahn developed particular skill with British tea rations, creating a strong, sweet brew that British soldiers lined up to receive. His victory tea, brewed with added condensed milk, a hint of cocoa powder, and crushed hard candies, became so popular that soldiers from neighboring units came to trade cigarettes and chocolate for a canteen cup. Lieutenant Harrington recorded in his October field report, "We're feeding 300 men 3 meals daily from kitchens designed for 150. The German cooks work 14-hour days without complaint. Their efficiency exceeds our own catering corps by any measure I can apply." This productivity didn't escape notice at higher command levels. By November 1944, British 2nd Army Headquarters had issued an official memorandum. German POW cooks may be retained at unit level where security permits and performance merits continuance. The cooking operation expanded beyond military personnel. In villages across the Allied advance, German field kitchens, now painted with British insignia but still operated by their original crews, provided hot meals to displaced civilians. Near Nijmegen, Müller's team fed 120 Dutch civilians daily, alongside their British and German military diners. Military government records document this unusual arrangement with characteristic bureaucratic understatement. German POW catering unit providing daily meals to civilian population under British supervision, reducing demand on civil affairs food supplies. The numbers tell the story of expanding operations. British quartermaster records from November 1944 show one German POW kitchen team feeding an average of 275 people daily, using 15% less fuel and 22% fewer raw ingredients than equivalent British catering units. By December, 17 documented German cooking teams operated under British supervision across the front, serving approximately 4,500 meals daily. Wilhelm Becker, the former Hamburg hotel chef, received permission to maintain a vegetable garden behind British lines. His notebook, preserved in Imperial War Museum archives, meticulously records yields: 85 pounds of turnips, 140 pounds of potatoes, 32 pounds of onions harvested before the first frost. These fresh ingredients transformed standard military fare into something approaching pre-war civilian meals. As winter approached, these cooking arrangements became increasingly formalized. British officers issued handwritten certificates to their German cooks, identifying them as essential personnel. These documents, several of which survive in various archives, protected the cooks from transfer to general POW camps. One certificate, signed by a Major Pemberton of the Royal Army Service Corps, reads simply, "The bearer has performed valuable services and is to be retained at unit level until further notice." What had begun as emergency improvisation was now official policy, a recognition that former enemies could provide essential services under proper conditions. By January 1945, as Allied forces crossed into Germany itself, the surreal nature of these arrangements intensified. German cooks were now preparing meals on German soil for the armies occupying their homeland. At British 21st Army Group headquarters in Kleve, Müller and his team served field marshals and generals, wearing clean white cook's garments with small POW badges sewn discreetly on the sleeves. The war's end in May 1945 created unprecedented questions. What happened to valued enemy workers when the shooting stopped? Müller's simple question to a British mess officer, "What happens to us now?" resonated across hundreds of similar arrangements throughout British-controlled territory. British War Office Directive 9118, issued days after Germany's surrender, provided answers. German POW catering personnel may continue their duties during the transition to peacetime operations. Repatriation of these specialists shall be prioritized according to operational requirements rather than standard protocols. Translation: the British weren't ready to lose their German cooks. For the Victory Day celebration on May 9, 1945, British commanders requested special meals from their German kitchen staffs. At Hamburg headquarters, Müller's team prepared roasted ham with pineapple, Duchess potatoes, and apple strudel, a meal simultaneously celebrating their own nation's defeat. British soldier Archer Jenkins recorded in his diary, "Strange watching Jerry cooks prepare our victory dinner. They worked with perfect professionalism, though it must have been bitter. The meal was excellent, perhaps their way of showing dignity in defeat." Through summer 1945, German POW cooks continued their duties, their status evolving from prisoners to something approaching civilian employees. Payment systems formalized, with wages deposited into accounts accessible after repatriation. British military government records from August 1945 show 842 German cooks still employed across the occupation zone, serving approximately 210,000 meals daily. The decision whether to request repatriation or continue working created personal dilemmas. Wilhelm Becker submitted a formal request to remain in British service, citing the opportunity to practice my profession with adequate resources versus returning to a city without functioning kitchens or reliable food supply. British authorities approved 214 similar requests by September 1945. For those choosing repatriation, British commanding officers frequently provided personal recommendation letters. One, written for Ludwig Hahn, stated, "This man has served as a cook under my command since October 1944. His conduct has been exemplary, his skills exceptional. He has earned the respect of British personnel through his professionalism and character. When Miller's original group finally received repatriation orders in October 1945, the British 50th Division organized a formal dinner where British officers served their departing German cooks. Lieutenant Colonel Richards presented each man with small gifts, British measuring spoons, cigarettes, chocolate, and a signed photograph of their British kitchen colleagues. These gestures, documented in multiple unit histories, represented recognition of bonds that had transcended enemy status. The story doesn't end at repatriation. In devastated post-war Germany, former POW cooks possessed an unexpected asset: intimate knowledge of Allied food systems and techniques. Their British military recommendation letters opened doors with occupation authorities that remained closed to most Germans. Fritz Müller opened a small restaurant in Frankfurt in December 1946, offering something extraordinary in a city of ruins: unlimited tea served British style with milk and sugar. Wilhelm Becker established Hamburg's first post-war hotel restaurant in February 1947, featuring distinctive Anglo-German cuisine. Ludwig Hahn's Victory Tea found new life in civilian establishments across the British occupation zone. Statistical records from West German hospitality associations reveal the impact. Approximately 340 hotels and restaurants established between 1947 and 1957 were founded or co-founded by former military cooks with British POW experience. These establishments employed an estimated 4,800 workers and served approximately 12.6 million meals annually by 1957. In 1962, British veterans of the 50th Division organized a reunion in Newcastle that included invitations to 7 German cooks who had fed them during the advance through Europe. 6 attended, traveling from Germany at British expense. Photographs show former enemies sharing meals and memories, united by the universal language of food that had first connected them amid war's destruction. Modern food historians recognize this wartime culinary exchange as more significant than previously acknowledged. The integration of German POW cooks into British military kitchens represents one of history's most unusual cultural exchanges. These daily interactions around fundamental human needs, preparing and sharing food, created understanding that formal reconciliation programs could never achieve. The legacy continues in subtle ways. British military dining facilities still serve dense brown bread that older personnel call Wehrmacht loaf. German restaurants near former British bases often feature distinctive afternoon tea services. These culinary echoes, spanning decades and generations, began with that surprising September morning when British soldiers, recognizing skilled professionals behind enemy uniforms, pragmatically asked their German prisoners to feed everyone. Fritz Müller, the captured cook who thought he faced barbarism and found respect instead, lived until 1983. In his final interview, conducted at age 76, he reflected on those extraordinary months. "We were enemies who became colleagues, then something like friends, all because someone recognized that hunger has no nationality, and good food speaks a language everyone understands." The captured German cooks, initially stunned by the request to prepare meals for their captors, ultimately demonstrated how shared food transcends artificial divisions. Their story reminds us that human connections, formed through the simple act of breaking bread together, often prove more durable than the conflicts that temporarily divide us. In a war defined by industrial slaughter and ideological hatred, 5 German cooks and their British captors discovered something unexpected in the steam rising from their field kitchens. Proof that humanity persists even when everything else has failed.